Okay, thank you for your welcome. First of all, I'd like to dedicate my speech today to my dear friend and colleague Graham Ian Opie. Graham passed away just 2 weeks before I came over here. He worked with me for 20 years in UFO research, and it took me some time to get him to work with me because he was an air traffic controller of 33 years. He was senior controller at Hamilton International Airport in New Zealand, and he trained young controllers for many years. He had quite an illustrious career, was a pilot as well, had been in the New Zealand Air Force, and had achieved a lot in aviation. So in 1995, Graham had a phenomenal sighting from the Hamilton air traffic control tower, and it was after that that I contacted him and we got to know each other, and eventually he made the bold step, in New Zealand at least, of stepping out of his comfort zone as an ATC while he continued working, but he also publicly became a member of my nationwide network, UFO research network, and became my right-hand man for 20 years. So it's a huge loss to us, and I hope that with the publicity that we have given Graham over the years, I'm sure it has inspired a lot of people in aviation in New Zealand to begin reporting to us, and certainly from the time that he joined us, we began to get some quite good aviation reports and military reports as well. Now, I'm just going to give you a little bit of a background before I get into my speech for today. I really wear two hats in ufology, or the UFO research fraternity. As Gary said, I have been a sighting investigator actively on the ground, out there, with cameras and witnesses for 40 years. But my other hat that I wear is in the contact field, because I've also had contact since early childhood and possibly before, as you'll find out. So in New Zealand, I'm known as a New Zealand UFO sighting investigator, and overseas I'm known as an experiencer. And the reason for that is that we've had a number of circumstances happen in New Zealand over the years with some phenomenal UFO sightings that have divided our small country, our population, our communities, and even divided families. And when people first began coming forward in the 70s about their contact experiences, it wasn't that well received because of what had taken place at that time. So some of you may recall the Kaikoura Light sightings in New Zealand of 1978-79. They were phenomenal sightings, and a lot of our UFO research has grown from those particular sightings. But at that time, there were also contacts beginning in New Zealand that were documented, and that was where I began to experience both things, both sightings and contact. In 2008 actually through to 2010, on behalf of my network, I lobbied the Chief of Defence in New Zealand, wrote him letter after letter, and asking for the files, New Zealand files, to be released. We didn't actually expect that there would be a lot in the files, because as previous speakers have said, there's always files that are withheld, that are in some other folder that you don't have access to. And so, true to form, New Zealand followed the lead of Australia, Canada and the UK and released the files. That's them there in the image. And if you look at all the coloured pieces of paper that are sticking out of the end of one pile and the other, those are actually pilot sightings and military sightings that were never properly investigated. They were filed, and if they were investigated, the results of those investigations were not in the files. So we actually considered this more of a public relations thing, because we didn't expect that some of the really juicy stuff that we have on file would be in there. And in fact, my archive is about 5 or 6 times as big as those files, and we have sightings going back to 1908. So we kind of shamed the Ministry of Defence in New Zealand publicly, because we had much more than they did. or that they were willing to release anyway. Okay, so today, the other night, on Thursday night, I spoke to Dave Hodrian's group in Birmingham, and I did an hour on some of the stunning New Zealand sightings that have occurred over recent years. But today I'm looking at the topic of thinking our way into the future, what Dr. Rudy Schuld, who I have been working with, calls new physics, the quantum alien technology. So the experiences I'm going to be looking at today involve telepathy, consciousness, and alien technology. Back in 2005, I saw a DVD of Dr. Schuld speaking at a conference, and I had the extraordinary feeling that I actually knew him, which of course I didn't, but it was one of those moments where you feel that somebody is an old friend that you know very well. And I decided that because he seemed to be very open-minded about consciousness and experiencers, abductees' experiences, I felt that I'd like to contact him and run some of my material past him. Because I had sat on my own personal experiences for a very long time. I'd spoken to the converted in New Zealand, to some UFO groups, but I hadn't really gone public on it at all. And as I've heard previous speakers comment on is the need for evidence to back up what you're saying. Unfortunately, in the contact arena, evidence is thin on the ground because a lot of it is anecdotal, experiential, and the best you can do, really, is find corroborative evidence. And so that is what I set about doing. I looked at my experiences and my memories of incidents and UFO sightings and missing time associated with them. And I began years and years of search and research because, as Gary pointed out, I'm a boring old school teacher, and it's in my nature to research and look into things carefully and to be very cautious about any claims I make or things that I say publicly. However, as Stanton has already pointed out, I don't want to be an apologist experiencer. And so eventually I did begin speaking out, and I spoke in Laughlin at the Congress in the States in 1999 and have spoken in about 5 or 6 other countries since. So I contacted Dr. Schuld actually in 2010. I finally got in touch with him and said to him, if I send you some of my material, would you be willing to have a look at it and give me some idea of how you view it? You know, is it totally bizarre? Am I barking up the wrong tree, or do you recognise something in this material? So I didn't expect to hear back from him actually, which is a bit of a disservice to Rudy because he's a marvellously polite man. And he did reply to me and said, well, send me a couple of chapters or from your manuscript and I'll have a look at it. I did, and he came back to me and said, oh, this makes complete sense to me in terms of physics, so send me some more. So we went through this process of me sending him material in a piecemeal fashion, and eventually he said, look, I will help you understand the science that you are talking about because I don't claim to be a scientist. And I was describing things that I didn't understand in scientific terms, but I could describe it in laywoman's terms. So in the end, he said to me, send me the worst you've got. Send me the stuff that you think's the most bizarre, that I'll throw my hands up and say no more. So I did, and those happened to be the 2 chapters or experiences that he actually could make the most sense of, which was an enormous surprise and shock to me. So over a period of 3.5 years, we worked on the manuscript, and in the end he said, look, instead of just advising you, I'd like to do footnotes, commentary, and a scientist's epilogue. And as far as I'm aware, it's probably the first book of its type from an experiencer that has that kind of content. So that is the book, The Dual Soul Connection, The Alien Agenda for Human Advancement. These are some of the entities that I have had contact with over the years, ranging from what I call ancient greys on the top left, to the mantis on the bottom left, and on the right-hand side we've got cone-headed entity, bulbous-headed entity, and top right, human-looking entities that to me seemed like advanced humans. As to whether they were from the future or whether they were some other race, I don't know. I didn't actually find that out. But Going back many years, if you had said to me I would be standing up talking about greys and mantises, I probably would have shied away from it. My experiences began when I was a child, very small, but of course as a child I didn't recognise them as anything to do with aliens or UFOs, because in New Zealand we'd heard about flying saucers, that was about it. So for me, would wake at night and I would see glowing figures by my bed with no visible features of facial features or indication of clothing or anything like that, just like a golden silhouette. And all communication between them and me was telepathic. We spoke with our minds. I don't recall ever speaking because my sister shared a room with me and she never woke up and said I was talking in my sleep or anything like that. So they would say to me that they were going to take me somewhere and I was going to be doing something with them, and then I'd remember no more. My next memory would be, as in this image, they would say to me, "Thank you very much," turn over, I'd be brought back, turn over, go to sleep, and magically and instantly I would. And of course years later I realised that that was because they facilitated that. But a defining moment came for me in 1975. Up until then, as a young child, I had memories and dreams, dreamlike memories, if I put it dream in inverted commas, of doing all kinds of things, using my mind in rooms that were very white and sterile, with creatures or entities that I couldn't see properly no matter how I seemed to strain my eyes to try to see them. Their physical features were veiled from me or kept from me, perhaps, so that I wouldn't be frightened. But that's how my memories are. Many years later, I had very different memories, and I began to remember in full what actually happened. But back in 1975, in a region of New Zealand called Hawke's Bay, I had what at that time was a shocking experience, where I was travelling on a lonely country road with a friend of mine who was a flatmate. And we're talking about a very remote area through sheep station country, and houses were few and far between. It was late afternoon, sunny and beautiful, and we saw lights in the sky, two lights side by side, which we assumed were either a helicopter or the landing lights of an agricultural aircraft coming into land. However, they instantly clicked off and appeared somewhat closer to us along a line of hills. Now, in that moment, our rational minds kicked in and we were saying, well, it's a helicopter. It moved really fast, but it's a helicopter. They clicked out and they went back along the line of hills again. So then it was, well, it's an aircraft and it's turning, so therefore, as it turns, we can't see its lights. So we rationalised all the time within those few split seconds. And then they disappeared again and appeared right next to us over the hill beside us. By this time, we'd brought our car to a halt at the bottom of a 2.5 kilometre straight. They disappeared again. We couldn't make any sense of it, so we started to set off again, and within seconds, a very enormous ball of light wider than the road came up behind us, engulfed the car, so it was so bright that it was painful. The buzzing sound was so intense it went right through your body and was completely mesmerising. And the last thing I remember is trying to put my hand down, like in slow motion, to wind the window up, thinking that that would keep me safe from whatever it was. And the last thing I recall is the feeling of the car lifting off the road, as you do feel when you're on the tarmac on a plane and it lifts off. It was a sunny late afternoon, and that was my last memory. My next memory was of a feeling of flotation and feelings as if I'd just woken up. The car was rocking, therefore it must have been somehow airborne. I felt it crash onto the road, the lights came on and we were at the far end of the straight, but it was pitch black and we'd lost an hour and a half. This experience catapulted me into, at the age of 20, into both sighting research and investigating UFO sightings and seeking out other people who'd experienced similar, but also it began a personal search into why this had happened to me, what had happened to me, where had I been in that hour and a half, and why was my flatmate so angry about it? Why could he not talk to me about it? Why did he eventually leave the flat to get away from someone who'd experienced something like that with him? Okay, so let's look at a couple of experiences that I have recollection of. Now, I'd just like to make the note at this point that my book is based on conscious memory of experiences. Now, some of the experiences I recall almost full detail, but it took some years before I began to recall full detail, and a catalyst moment happened with the grey entities that I've had contact with, where they were in the hall of my home with me and one of my sons and my partner, and I realised in this altered state they put me in that I was going to be leaving with them and that my youngest son would be left on his own. And that really flipped me out of this state, and I began questioning him and saying, I'm not going. At this point, I also tapped into a telepathic conversation between the three of them, in which they were saying, it's time for her to remember more now, she is aware. So that was a catalyst point where I began to recall more of my experiences instead of just the beginning or the end or bits from the middle. This experience happened around, it's chapter 18 of my book called The Galaxy Screen. And it happened around 1978 to 83, I don't have the exact date, but it was when I was living in a particular area of New Zealand and those are the years that I was living there. On this occasion, I was with a number of humans in a room on board a grey craft, and we were actually holding a relaxed telepathic conversation with the greys, and they were actually asking us questions about our lifestyle. And this seemed quite out of the norm, because normally when you're on a craft, they are in charge and you're doing what they want you to do. But on this occasion, they were actually interested in interacting with us. And I expressed interest in space, which has always been an interest of mine, and one of them offered to take me to see what I nicknamed the Galaxy Screen. So I was taken up a spiral gangway up to what I assume was in the top of a craft. And as I walked into this room with the short entity, I was quite confused by the spatial characteristics of the room, because I could see it was roughly a square room, which is also quite unusual on a craft, but there seemed to be a rounded quality about it, as if I was actually looking into a fishbowl, and I couldn't work that out. And he said to me, don't worry about that, you will understand what that is when I explain what the screen is. So in the centre of the room was that screen you can see at the bottom, like a console sloped, rather like this lectern in front of me, but much larger. And it was divided into hundreds and hundreds of grids, tiny graph-like grids. And on it I could see the galaxy, which I was told was our galaxy. And he demonstrated to me how he could touch one part of that grid, and what I now know to be a virtual reality show, put it that way, of that part of the grid would come up in the room. So he was able to bring up a planet, and it hung in the air. Now this is back in the days when I'd never heard of virtual reality, I don't think it even existed then. But this is what I experienced and was able to describe back in this time period. So you could walk through it, you could walk around it, he could make it bigger, he could make it smaller or whatever. So that was the characteristics. So we stood within a hologram, which I didn't know it was in those days, which formed a giant sphere almost entirely encompassing the interior of the room, filling it with planetary bodies from this grid of the galaxy. And I was able to see, he was able to show me also by altering the characteristics or the mechanisms, technology of the screen, he was able to show me what I refer to as like magnetic fields, or fields around the planets that were moving. And I remember thinking how beautiful it was. It was as if they were flowing and breathing around the planets. At one point he said to me that I should prepare myself, because he wanted to show me something that I would probably find quite distressing. And he said he was going to take me back to a specific time in Earth's history, and he brought the Earth up in the centre of the room and told me that he was going to show me something significant. And he reached into my mind in a way that I will describe a bit later on, and he was able to draw out from my mind something that would enable me to understand what the purpose of him showing this to me was. And that was, he pulled out the terminology, it will put fire in your belly. And what he showed me was the time period when, in 1945, when there was the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Now, many experiencers over the years have talked about how they have been shown on the craft things to do with nuclear warfare, things to do with these particular explosions. And it is a very significant point in our history. He talked about the damage that was done at that time. And he said, and he would adjust the technology to show me. And this is what I saw. So I was shown like a shock wave that went out from this hologram, and it went out and out and out beyond the perimeter of the spherical virtual show. And he explained how any explosions of this kind not only harm us, but the shock waves go out further and further and further. So as many people say, anything we do like this doesn't just affect us and our atmosphere, it will affect our neighbours as well. He's showing the Earth's magnetic field and it's exploding upwards. I can see the effect of the explosion reverberating right out through the solar system and further out into the galaxy. So these are quotes from my book. And he said, time could stop for you if this happened again. There will be nothing left of you on the grid, referring to the galaxy screen grid. My good friend Robert Silas, who I believe has spoken at this conference previously, has written the book Unidentified, the UFO Phenomenon, and I will leave it up to people like Robert and Stanton to talk about the whole effect of nuclear technology and nuclear warfare, but clearly it is one of the things that the ETs are deeply concerned about. And Robert said, if each of us commits to the idea of the complete and total abolition of nuclear weapons, together we will have prevented nuclear war. Moving on now, this is quite a long experience. This is one of the experiences in my life that I have the most in-depth and complete memory of. And in my book it's chapter 9, The Test, Part 1, An Alien Internet, 1993. So this occurred in 1993, and you will hear descriptions of technology which didn't exist, certainly in New Zealand at that time. In 1993, I did not have a computer. In fact, in New Zealand, nobody had a computer. The only people in New Zealand who had any kind of ancient computer were the institutes like universities, perhaps hospitals, I don't know, government departments. But the public did not get the internet and computers until 1995. So please bear that in mind as we go through this experience, because you will hear descriptions of technology which is now in our arena and now produced by us, which I saw way back then. So 16 humans were taken, I'll just go back a minute, down a corridor, and the first piece of technology I'll note in this particular experience is the light in the corridor. There was no visible light source, and as we walked we were surrounded by this shimmering light. So as we progressed along the long corridors, the light moved with us as if we were in a capsule. As to whether that was our physical electric field reacting with something, or whether we were triggering something, I don't know. But this is an important factor of being on a craft. And I can imagine if we use that kind of technology in many of our cities where we have lights burning all night, this would be very useful. We were taken into a room where there were two, what I call elder greys, one with the cone-shaped head, one with the bulbous head, who were up the front at a console. And we were told that we were going to be tested. We were going to each be given a test to do. Now, the purpose of the test was not to see who got the right answer or whatever. It was simply to observe how we could use their technology after years and years of being taught to do certain things with the mind, with consciousness, in combination with their technology, which relies heavily on consciousness and telepathy, and touch. So it wasn't so much the result that mattered, but how we arrived at that result and what skills we could display and use in the process. So these two guys were at the front, some discussion took place, we were told that we would be assigned a grey partner each who would assist us. So we were each assigned to a console and seated at the console, and that symbol that you can see on there represented me, so we each had a different symbol on there, and from my understanding, that symbol contained all the data that they had about us. So everything about us, from our blood type to you name it, would be encapsulated in that symbol. We were told that we were going to be given a download of information that would take about 1.5 to 2 minutes, and it would basically be like putting whole sets of encyclopedias in our mind that we would have to sift through to find the information we needed for the question or task that had been posed to each of us. We each had a different task to do, but they were of similar complexity. So the mind transfer took place. Now, the interesting thing is that they then produced what I call information tablets. So already that should be ringing a bell for you. I've got one down the back. But this was 1993. However, the difference is that this tablet was paper thin. It was like a very thin X-ray sheet, if I can put it that way. You can see by the colour it's got that dark greyish look of an X-ray sheet. It had rounded edges. It was slightly beveled. It was very, very thin. You could have rolled it up. But I was fascinated by it because it seemed to be alive, in the sense that I described back in those days that the colours and the images were standing out from the sheet. So of course I now know what I was talking about was likely to have been 3D imagery. On my sheet there were 5 boxes, but everybody else had different number of boxes, and we were going to use the information contained in each of these boxes, combined with the information that had been put into our mind, combined with information that was already on the console in front of us that we knew how to access through consciousness to solve our particular problem. So there's no visible power source with this. It had like 3D live imagery, individualised data, and it was a touch screen. And one of the images on it, which I used to demonstrate a few minutes ago, was 3 planets surrounded by moving fields. And my task was to find a way to travel between those planets without damaging or cutting through the natural flow and movement of those fields. The tablet was put into a slot on this console, and then it brought up the whole imagery on the screen. You could magnify it, you could reduce it, you could do all kinds of things. You could think to the machine and it would do something for you. You could touch the screen, etc. This is 1993, and I'm in New Zealand. Well, not at that moment. Okay, so while I'm sitting there working on this, and everyone's working on it, the grey next to me began to give me some extra information. This wasn't in any sense cheating or giving me an advantage, but they seemed to take, from my experience, any opportunity to educate humans and broaden our awareness. So he was talking about this flow of energy that goes through space, these rivers, what he called rivers through space. Oh, and Dr. Schuld has said, I suspect that the technology Suzy used was 3D, which would involve a deeper quantum development of computing much closer to consciousness itself, and a giant leap for our civilization, because we haven't got there yet as far as we're aware. So the grey was referring to these rivers through space, and he talked about how when they travel, they have different ways that they can travel. We hear about, travelling at speed, we hear about warping time and warping space. But he also talked about how they follow natural flows, because they know that by cutting through things on certain occasions, they may do harm or create waves for other civilizations. And that was interesting to me, and I distinctly remembered that. He talked about how when they bring their craft into our atmosphere, they do exactly the same. They are observant of our natural flows, our weather patterns, our certain areas where there are certain energies, what some people may refer to as ley lines, where there are certain energies that come up out of the ground around seismic activity or plate movement, as we experience often in New Zealand with our earthquakes and volcanoes. So this helped me to understand one of their modes of travel. But he also said to me that in the future we will eventually become aware of the damage that aircraft and supersonic kind of stuff that we now have would do to our atmosphere and to us. He commented that thousands of aircraft traverse our skies daily, and we will eventually understand the harmless disturbance to natural energy fields is causing to life on Earth, affecting our health and nervous systems, as well as the pollution caused by fuel consumption. And just going aside from that, and the other day, just before coming over here, I actually found this cutting in a newspaper, and this photograph was taken by NASA. They were photographing over the desert in the United States a supersonic aircraft, and they have captured the shock waves. Now, high-speed photography in more recent years has enabled us to see the massive shock waves that are caused by explosions. And there is this unseen damage that can occur, not just to the field of the planet that we live in, but to our nervous systems as well. And apparently NASA and a few other companies are looking at improving supersonic travel, which is not permitted over large populated areas for these kinds of reasons, the noise and the shock waves. So they're looking to minimise this. So here is a little corroborative thing that I was told in 1993 that has now come to fruition. Let's go back to that script, that tablet I showed you before, and one of the boxes had script on it. Now, from my understanding and use of alien script, there's a lot of people out there, experiencers and abductees, who say they're able to read script and they're able to write it, and that's fine. But it seems to me that there are two kinds of script. There's one that's like a bridging, seems to be a bridging script. Some of you may be familiar with Jim Sparks in his book. He talks a lot about script and how it can be read and how it has this kind of similarity to our own multiple languages, written languages. And I am wondering and theorising that there may be this bridging script that the ETs have developed, which people on craft have learnt to read. But I have worked with what I refer to as the native grey script, as a way of putting it. And that is a script that is accessed through consciousness and telepathy. It cannot just be read off the screen like that. It has to be accessed in conjunction with the technology and your mind. And it's like spiralling down a rabbit hole of consciousness into one script image and finding all the data that is contained in that just simply by looking at it, and you are electrically connected to the console with these pads that you put your hand on, and that enables you to access this level of consciousness associated with their technology. So the position of the script, the shape of the script, and where it might sit on a page, if you want to put it that way, can all have relevance. And when you are working with this kind of script, where you actually your mind goes into it, I call it depth reading the script, because there is no other way to describe it. You just don't read it like words on a page. You access it. So a friend of mine in the States who's has had quite a lot of experiences, and this is a former military person, he said that in 1974 he had an experience where he was waking up. He was semi-awake at the time, and as he opened his eyes, he saw an array of technical symbols and equations pass before his eyes. Now, this man is an advanced mathematician. So he saw this array of symbols going past, and it passed quite quickly. As things often do on a craft, you are subjected to high-speed things which you have learnt to absorb over many years. So this long array passed quickly, it went into his mind, into his subconscious, whatever, but he did not he did not recall any one particular aspect of it, but he felt it represented the vast makeup of something simple and familiar, like a cheese sandwich. So he described to me how this one thing, this one array of data referred to something simple. So this is what I'm talking about, depth reading script almost in reverse. If you take the piece of script and you look into it and you spiral into it with your mind or your consciousness, you access all this data that is in the computer or in whatever their alien internet is. You have access to it. And what he was being shown was that something very simple to us, like a cheese sandwich, can have a massive amount of data associated with it. And he said that he felt he was being shown how in the future we would have huge problems with accessing data, because as our internet grows and as our knowledge bases and our cloud computing and all the rest of it grows, we are completely in data overload, and it's going to get worse. So how does anyone who wants to study a particular subject cope with that? And how do they access that? How do they know what data is needed and what isn't? So if we look at the data description of a cheese sandwich, it might be, well, who made the bread? What company made the bread? What grain went into the bread? Where was it grown? What kind of grain is it? Where did the butter come from? What herd of cows made the milk to create the butter? What was their genetic history? What kind of soil did the grass grow that they ate that produced the milk, and so on? You could go on forever. Who made it? Why did they make it? What was their genetic history? What's their psychological history? What's their health history? So you could just go on and on and on a cheese sandwich. So in the future, we're going to have to find ways to describe data. We're going to have to find ways to access data. And I think we will move closer and closer to how the ETs do it. And it will be a natural progression, or perhaps something we're given some assistance with. So, this is, for the past year or so, genetic scientists at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine in New York have been experimenting with data. They realise that in the future we're going to have this data overload, and they're looking at abstract ways and theorising how they can convey that data and how people can access the right data intuitively. Oops. So I found that very interesting, accessing data intuitively, and it's part of perceptual learning. And as a teacher, I know that perceptual learning is a huge subject that you cover with kids, teenagers, humans, right from birth to death. But this style of perceptual learning is how do we read through massive amounts of data and decide what is going to be useful to us. So humans are now looking at this problem that I was using in 1993. How to access data. I was flipping through it on the screen. I was flipping through pages and pages in my mind, selecting out what I needed in order to do the test problem that had been put to me. So we are now moving into the same area ourselves. So was this test situation that I was subjected to, was this experimenting with how humans were going to cope in the future? Is it actually putting some input into our society from the ETs? I don't know. These are theories. But certainly what I experienced and what I'm seeing now is starting to move closer together. Now, in part 2 of this test situation, there were 4 of us out of the 16 who passed the test. By that I mean we showed usage of the greatest amount of skills rather than got the right answer. And I was one of those. There were 3 males and myself. And I was asked if I would like to take the pile of tablets to the next level down on the craft. In order to access that level, I travelled in what you're looking at on screen there, that shaft of white perspex-like material filled with what looks like liquid. But it was actually light, but it felt like liquid when you entered it. So it was It was an elevator, what I nicknamed the light elevator. Sometimes I called it liquid light. When you stepped into it, there was no floor, and I recall as a 12-year-old being very frightened to get into it because I thought I was going to fall down a big hole. And I sat on the floor with my feet in it for a while before I actually stepped into it. When you step into it, there's a sparkling bluish-white light all around you. It's like electric light, but it doesn't spark and hurt. It's soft, like velvet on your skin. And you think a symbol, because each, like floors of a department store, each of the levels of the craft has a symbol associated with it. There's a moment of blackness and then you're there. And another perspex, like doors opening in front of you, and you're exiting into another area of the craft. So that's what I travelled in. Now it's interesting to note that in 2006 I was speaking at a conference in Australia, and one of the things I have tried to do over the years, because this evidence-based thing is really important, you don't want people to think you're a complete fruitcake who imagines all these experiences and then writes a book about it. It took me 40 years to get this book done because I was so careful and I was so worried about what people might think, but that kind of fear dissipated once I started working with Rudy. So I searched on the internet to see if I could find any images on websites that had experiencers' drawings on them to see if there was anything similar, and look what I found. An experiencer in the States called Jeff, who had drawn something virtually identical. So I contacted him through the website and didn't give him any information, just said, "What is this thing? Are you willing to tell me? I think I've seen something similar. Can you describe its characteristics? Is this really an experience of yours? Is it your imagination? Like, did you draw it for fun? Or is it reality?" He came back and said, "No, this experience happened on this date in this place. And this is how I remember it. It's a light elevator, and I call it liquid light. And when you get into it, it feels like velvet on your skin. And you think your way to another level on the craft, and then the door opens and you step out." So this was a revelation for me, because for many years I'd struggled with my quite extensive memories of being on a craft and the amount of detail that I could recall. I'd struggled with it because there were a lot of people who said you couldn't possibly remember all of that, you must have made it up. And so when I found this corroboration, it was a revelation moment for me, and it gave me quite a bit of confidence. But when I went to speak at the conference, I also spoke to a support group in Australia of experiencers. And a young girl came up to me afterwards and said, with her mother, and said, "Would you have a look at the drawings I've done of my experiences?" So we leafed through them and discussed them. And I found that one. And I said to her, "Well, what can you tell me about that?" She said, "Well, it's like a teleporter. I call it a teleporter." She was only 15. She's in the space age. I wasn't. "A tubular column of bright, soft, sparkling light that transports you elsewhere," is how she described it. And basically we got talking and she was able to describe the same thing. So now I had two other people, myself, someone in the States, someone in Australia. We've never communicated, we don't know each other. We can describe a piece of technology that works with consciousness, and we could describe it exactly. Dr. Schultz said the light elevator is almost certainly an anti-gravity device involving magneto-electric influence on gravity, and the device was under thought control in interaction with the conscious intent of the enveloped sentient beings, the ones who were travelling in it. But let's go back to that picture there and have a look at what else is in it. Because on the wall there is a screen of sorts. Now I call that a window screen because I have seen them transform from being a window where you can see out of the craft or into another room, and then it transforms to a screen where you're actually seeing something happening on the screen. I've seen them touch it and it'll disappear and it'll just be a wall. So wouldn't it be great in the future if in our home all that clutter and rubbish and books and things we've hoarded for years could be behind a wall, and we can touch it if we want to see it and access it and open it up, and we can touch it and take it out of view of all our visitors. That would be great. So this window screen had an image on it which I found intriguing. I didn't know whether I was looking through a window or actually seeing like a video kind of thing playing. But there was this dome-like thing here inside a white room. And in that dome there was foliage, like little shrubs. There was a pathway. It looked like a garden. And there was a grey and human and others in it. There seemed to be like a golden light in it, almost like artificial sunlight. Now, why there would be a grey in there in those conditions, I don't know. But this entity here was a female, and you can't always tell the difference. She said that's where you humans go sometimes when you're here with us for some time. So quite obviously there are humans on this planet who spend quite some time on alien craft, as we'll talk about a bit later on. So we'll look at that a bit closer. So I was shown this, and at that point while I was watching it, I heard a noise behind me and felt what I can only describe as an intense energy, an intense presence behind me. And, no, I've gone too far, we'll carry on with this. This screen actually has 5 functions. It's a wall, it can be a window, it can be a communication screen like Skype, where you talk to someone, communicate with someone else. It can be a mammoth database and a surveillance screen. Now when I was talking at this conference in Australia, I had dinner with Dr. Roger Lear, who was also speaking at the conference. And Roger didn't have any idea what I was going to be talking about the next day, and while we were sitting there, he said to me, we swapped stories about a few things, and he said, I want to tell you about something that a person in the military in the States told me. And he described how this person was at a base and said that there was an alien craft on the tarmac at a military circuit base. So he says, and I just listened to this, and he said this person was taken on board this craft and could feel that there were steps or a ramp that he was assisted to get up. Once he went through the door with the other personnel, he could see everything inside the craft. And he could look out a window onto the tarmac. But one of the personnel with him said this is also what it can do, and he described how this screen had 5 functions and could do these other things exactly as I had seen on the craft and been told by the Greys that they could do. So when Roger started saying this sort of brought a great deal more reality to the story for me. And I said, okay, well, can I quote you in my speech? And he said, yes, that's fine. So this corroboration has come along. Okay, so here's this presence that I felt behind me, and I turned and saw this hybrid-like being. Now, I could tell that he was actually quite young, but he looked like a little crippled human by the way he walked with slightly bent knees and slightly stooped. He was carrying some tablets, and his presence was very, very intense. So you could feel high intelligence, you could feel intense focus. An intense field around him is the only way that I can describe it. And on this occasion, I kind of bumbled through and tried to ask him questions. And an interesting thing happened in that he was able to telepathically hold me at bay. With mind control, he basically stopped me speaking, so my mouth was going, I was trying to get words out for a few seconds and couldn't because he just stopped me. And he communicated with the female entity, basically saying, what is she doing here? She shouldn't be here now, she should be somewhere else by now, because everything is compartmentalised and runs to a rigid timetable, because they take thousands and thousands of humans on board craft for a variety of purposes, and they have to keep the program going. So then he kind of released me, and so I asked one question. And it was another one of these very special and important moments where I said to him, can you give me some advice for my life? And he said simply corroboration. And at first I was a bit disappointed with that. One word? You know, I finally get to ask you a question, you give me a one-word answer? But I have found that to be the most important word that an experiencer could have. Because there is no textbook for what we experience. There are no rules. No, there's no expert on it. I smile to myself when I see researchers who haven't been on a craft billed as being famous people or people who are, you know, world experts on it. They're not. They collect material from people like us. And that word corroboration was extremely important because that's what I set about doing from that point on. Trying to find things that are similar described by other experiencers and trying to piece the puzzle together. The interesting thing about this entity was his eyes. Now, when my husband, who I must thank for doing all these images for me, when my husband first drew it, he drew that black slit going downwards like a cat's eye because that seemed to look normal for our eyesight and the way we look at things. But we got to near divorce situation because I had to say, no, it wasn't like that and I don't want it like that, draw it again. He drew it again and I was happy with it because that's how I remember it, as odd as it may seem. Okay, so let's look a little bit closer at telepathy. Telepathy is a multi-sensory experience, and on a craft, when they use telepathy to convey something to you, it's not just like something we all experience where sometimes just before the phone rings we get this kind of message, oh, such and such is going to ring me, and then the phone rings and we think, oh, that's great, I'm psychic, you know, I picked that up. It must have been telepathy. And we consider it as a two-way thing between two people. And it's using the mind. But on the craft, when they use telepathy, you are flooded and bombarded, not only with a message kind of thing in your head or an understanding or an awareness in your head, but you're also flooded with smells and sights and images in your head, images that float in the air. You are flooded with feelings, you're flooded with emotions and movement and all kinds of things. So it's a very holistic experience, and I can understand that for people who aren't used to it, it's completely overwhelming. So let's look at some of the methods that they use. There's downloads, which I explained before, where people, they transfer information to you at speed, and it can be a big amount of information. Information transfers is similar, but sometimes much smaller and takes a shorter time. Thought seeds are where they will give you like the structure of a piece of information, and they will allow room for you to develop it yourself and make decisions or make additions to it yourself. A multi-layered stream is when they can send out 3 or 4 or 5 pieces of telepathy on different levels or different levels of information all at the one hit. So this gentleman down here with the cap, if I wanted to send some information to him, I might do several levels of it so that he would get a little bit of each and he would absorb enough for him to have a greater understanding. And we've got telepathic accents where different species, just as we have different accents in our ethnic groups, different species can have a different way of conveying things, and I call that telepathic accents. Fishing is when they want to find a terminology like what I described before, where they want to find something in your mind that's going to match the concept that they're trying to convey to you. So they might pull out a terminology, or they might pull out a terminology and then push in the piece of information couched in that terminology so that you instantly understand it. Child to adult intellectual view. When I was 8, they were able to take me forward in time in my understanding of something, give me an understanding of it from almost like an adult perspective, and then take me back again. So that understanding would sit in there, and then when a certain situation arose in my life, that understanding would be triggered, and there would be this more adult view of it. Multiple telepathic messaging is when one entity can send out a whole stream of pieces of information to several people at once. They can ascertain who in a room has missed out on bits of information, and at the end of the session they'll just send it out, and it'll just go out to multiple people at once, and you all might get something different depending on what you've missed out on. And exclusion I've talked about, where they can hold you at bay. They can keep this whole side of the room from hearing their telepathy, and that side will get it. Moving on to some more about telepathy. I witnessed a child on a craft, a young child of 7, doing something extraordinary, and that is that he was using his brain like a USB or a memory stick. So he was given a set of images. He was given something to do with space. For an example, he was given images, Earth images of flowers, more space or galactic things, mountains. These are just examples. The Grey, working with him, then having given him this massive amount of data at rapid speed into his head, then asked him to reconfigure the sets, reconfigure them in a different order according to the Grey's directions. And then the child, putting his hand on a touchpad, would transfer that to the computer, the organic computer, and up would come the stream of images on the computer for the Grey to look at, or anyone else like me standing around watching. Now what was actually happening was the Grey was giving the child these images in a frequency. So the child did not have to remember every single image. He registered the blueprint, and then he transferred the blueprint to the computer, and the computer transferred it to the image. Information is transferred as frequencies, which like-minded minds can mentally view as imagery. Frequency to image. And Dr. Schild said about this chapter is for me an amazing corroboration of what I understood about the quantum hologram formulation of information processing in the alien technology. So he was very particularly interested in this one. Now let's have a look more at the dual soul side of the book, which can be a little bit confusing. You don't have a soul, you are a soul. You have a body, said C.S. Lewis. So in my early days, I had a memory of what I thought must be something from before I even got into this life, where I was a purple ball of light and I had a blue ball of light with me. And we were somehow or other communicating with a wise body of entities who were deciding whether or not I could do this life. There were certain tasks I had to do in it, and I had to meet up to their standards. So we're talking here about what a lot of people talk about, the spiritual hierarchy of the planet that is in charge, if I can put it that way, of how we get into this life and how we decide what we're going to do and what we're going to learn and why. And I was in a situation where this blue ball of light was talking on my behalf. When I was 8, I had an experience on a craft where I was asked if I would like to meet another child. And this relates to this. I was in a playroom playing with other children where we would levitate things, we would make holographic images in the air, we would interact telepathically and get to know each other as children. I was asked by a Grey if I would like to go to a room and meet a child, and I said yes, that would be good. But he seemed quite, as if I sensed he was holding something back. Even as an 8-year-old, I could tell he wasn't telling me the whole story. And he said he would tell me about this child. So he put all this information, as I explained before, in 3 rapid streams into my head. The first one, you're going to meet a child, and this is a bit about them. The second one told me all about how this child would work within their programs, as I was going to be doing in my life. And the third one was smoothing all of that over. Okay, let's go now and meet this kid. But I was very disappointed when, in fact, after waiting for a while, 2 Greys came in, not with another child to meet, but with a blue ball of light. And I was told, this is going to be your son. When you are older, you'll get married, you'll have a child. This is a soul that will incarnate into that child. This is what this child needs to do in his life, and you are going to support him. Whatever you do in your life will have an effect on his. So at the age of 8, I had quite a huge responsibility put on me. He left the room and allowed me to play with this ball of light for a while, interacting with it, running around, actually conversing with it telepathically quite easily, because that's just simply consciousness. It doesn't matter whether you've got a body or you're a ball of light, it's consciousness. And then they came back into the room, having observed it from afar, telepathically, and said, this is going to work, this is fine. You will play with this ball of light often when you come on a craft, and you will get to accept that it is going to be your son. And I was returned to the playroom, and I asked, can I tell the other kids? And they said, no, this is only for you. And immediately, all memory of having met this blue ball of light faded from my mind. Now we jump forward in time to this blue ball of light again, to when I'm heavily pregnant with my first son and I'm taken on board a craft. This incident occurred when I woke up and saw a shaft of light, blue light shining down into my room, and my recollection the next day was of this incident. And I was put on a bed and told, we're going to do the soul insertion now, and the grey put his hand over my forehead and basically slowed my entire metabolism down. And they then brought in a whole lot of little grey children who I was told would be his, accompany him through life. They would be like his watchers. He would learn with them, do things with them, and they slowed my metabolism down until I was barely breathing. I went very cold, and the blue ball entered my body and that of the unborn child. So what is the dual soul? From my understanding, the dual soul is humans who have been genetically selected for a whole raft of reasons over a period of generations, 4 generations. The last 2 of those generations, so me and my son, and many other people like us, before we incarnated in this life, were given this interim step whereby we had acquired an aspect to our soul that allowed us to access the grey intelligence or consciousness, allowed us to be able to use it. So when we go on board a craft, we perhaps experience very different things to what many abductees and experiencers report. So there's much more interaction, and it's much deeper. And the combination of this creates the human persona in this life with a task to do. I have seen the same thing with entities on board craft, where I can see them transition between 2 species when they are working on a particular thing. You can see their physical form change and morph, and you can see aspects of them, of the two species that they are combined. I have seen people rise out of their body or walk out of their body, going from a human form, and many experiencers report this, where they are on a craft and they walk out of their body as a grey. I've been writing to Joe Nyman, who's a UFO researcher in the States, and he reported many years ago this duality. We've been communicating with each other. He called it dual reference, and in a paper he wrote for the MIT conference, he said, in this paper I report the discovery of an even more profound set of images that causes the abductee or experiencer to completely reorient their perspective of the nature of these experiences. I call these perspective-altering images dual reference, the experiencing of oneself as both human and alien at the same time. It implies the taking up of residence in the human form at birth or before of a fully developed intelligence which is both human and non-human in nature, and of the prearranged monitoring to be conducted throughout life, which is exactly what I've just been talking about with these blue balls of light and experiences. And Dr. John Mack also stated, roughly half of my recent cases have revealed a relationship to the beings which is similar to Joe Nyman's dual reference. Dual identity appears to be a fundamental dimension of the consciousness expansion or opening that is an intrinsic aspect of the abduction phenomenon itself. Dual soul, dual reference, and many people report past life, talk about a past life as an alien entity. We'll skip that. Okay, so in my book I describe 3 waves of volunteers coming to the planet, why each of those is here, what their purpose is, and how they are helping with assistance from the ET races to get the planet moving and evolving and opening up more spiritually. And I'm in the second wave, the communicators, which is what I'm doing. My son is in the third wave. We look at disclosure and we cry out for it and we say we're ready for it. I don't think that we are ready for it. I think we have a long way to go yet. It's a precarious process fraught with havoc. First of all, we have to create firm foundations to broaden the public understanding of UFO contacts and experiences and UFO sightings. Because this is what we're experiencing at present. We are experiencing earth changes. We are experiencing chaos on many levels. We are experiencing the shocking state where there are thousands and millions of people with nowhere to go, no home, and the world is a changing place. So my whole aspect of the book that I have up the back there that I talk and write about is that we are moving closer to a time of examination when the evidence that is undeniable can no longer be ignored. And perhaps we have to hit rock bottom in this way before we are shaken into this realisation. Thank you very much, folks.